Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Aloha.
Aloha. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And we had a very short conversation in New Hampshire.
I was trying to remember where that was, but
Yeah.
yes, it was in New Hampshire.
And we were talking about TikTok, and you gave a talk that I found really interesting. And I don't say that about all political speeches. But I guess you're a recovering politician at this point.
I don't even that I've never been comfortable with that label, and because of all, unfortunately, that goes along with that these days.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I sort of get anxious about reading political books because I expect
I don't blame you.
I'm going to read like canned bullshit.
Yep.
And the two books that I've read recently that I really enjoyed was yours.
Thank you.
And I love the way that you weave your philosophical viewpoints with your personal stories, and it felt real, which makes it
is
sort
real.
of unpolitical.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad that was your experience in reading it. That's what I had hoped for.
And Rand Paul's recent book that's an expose on Anthony Fauci and
Yeah.
that whole thing was also like a not political book in a sense.
Right. But
But-
a strong dose of truth.
But
I'm like you, by the way. I can't tell you how many of my former colleagues have given me copies of their memoirs, and I just, I'll thumb through it and read a couple of pages, and it's just, can't do it.
it's tedious, it's predictable.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it ends up, too often these political memoirs end up being just more about themselves rather than the work,
Yes, yes.
the country, the people,
It's as if they're self-absorbed.
One might draw that conclusion.
Can't imagine. So like Aloha is obviously, I think most of us know that is a greeting
Yeah.
when you're in Hawaii, but your deeper definition of that in the introduction was a bit of a revelation to me. What does aloha mean to you?
I did a little mini crossword puzzle. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it was literally exactly that. It was 5 letters and traditionally used as hello or goodbye in Hawaii. So obviously that is the most commonly.
You got that one.
Thankfully I got that one right. That was an easy one. It is most often the way we greet each other in Hawaii. But what most people don't know is the why. Why is that? Because it translated, it does not mean hello or goodbye. And the reason why we greet each other with aloha is because of the very deep and powerful spiritually grounded meaning behind the word, where alo means to share, and ha is it means the breath of life in the most deep and spiritual sense of the word. And we greet each other with aloha so that we immediately recognize each other as the eternal spirit within, as children of God, that spiritual connection that we all share. And it allows us to cut through all the crap, all the labels and just whatever baggage you might be carrying around on any given day. Greeting each other with aloha says that I see you, I respect you, I care for you, and therefore then we can have a truly meaningful conversation or exchange, and something positive will come from this because of it being grounded in that recognition.
I feel like we might need a little bit more of that right now.
We need so much of it, and I talk about this and I share aloha with people everywhere I go, and usually it's just like, oh yeah, you're from Hawaii, aloha, but I try to share this meaning with people everywhere because it is what we need most.
Yeah.
In our politics and in our country. There's a quote. I think it's in the book, but it's one that I've referenced quite often over the years from one of our Native Hawaiian elders. Auntie Pulahi Paki was her name. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing this, but she said, the world will look to Hawaii for peace, and that peace can be found in aloha.
Yeah. I think this reminded me of a thing that I struggle to define, as a libertarian. We're viewed as the guys who are sort of the rugged individualists and, don't tread on me,
Yes,
leave me alone. But of course, you can't have a sense of belonging or mutual respect unless people are free to cooperate.
yes, to
So
make that choice, because it is a choice.
It's a choice. It's a responsibility.
Yes.
It's a personal burden. Like liberty is a burden.
Yeah.
That people have to take responsibility for. And when we insert government program X between us, and we start fighting about who's going to be in charge so that they can redivide the spoils for those guys.
Right.
I think
versus the other guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like a fight for the Game of Thrones when it should be about getting back to that sense of empathy and personal responsibility, but also trying to understand where the other person's coming from.
Yes, exactly. So that we can make the best informed choices.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more.
So
I think that's just I want to highlight that point that you made about individual responsibility, and I think it's one that unfortunately in our society has become, I want to say less emphasized, but that implies that, even in recent history, it was at one time emphasized. Obviously, it's what our founders had envisioned for our country. But, with this increase in, the victim culture and all of these things have happened to me, and therefore my future is predisposed or predestined, or I'm limited because of these external circumstances or any of these things. It's really what I try to convey to people in my call to action at the end of the book, but everywhere I go is, look, if you're frustrated about what's happening in our country, there's nobody else to look at other than yourself. We have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what, as an American citizen, I am responsible for whatever system of governance that we have, and those who we choose to put into those positions that should be public service, but are positions in our government that have been for a very, very long time. And there's blame across both parties of people who have taken those positions and used them for their own self-interest or their own partisan interest.
Yeah. So the book is doing quite well.
So far. It's been received. It's been received in some predictable ways by the people in this town in Washington, D.C. But I've been really heartened by how it's been received by just, everyday Americans in different parts of the country who send me notes, or they've written reviews on Amazon or whatever. People who feel like these are things that they've been feeling and concerned about for a long time, but haven't heard brought to the forefront, especially people who are Democrats or former Democrats who've been too afraid to stand up and speak out. But one of the things that I'm so glad that a lot of people have come away with is a sense of hope by the end of the book, because I did an interview the other day with a newspaper reporter, and he's like, Tulsi, you really took it to the Democrat elite in this book. Like, you went hard. And he's like, do you think they deserve it? And I said, yes, absolutely. I mean, he says, it seems like it's coming from yes, it's coming from a visceral place of experience. And every word that I wrote, I meant, and I went hard because of the seriousness of what's happening in our country, where, just the basics, the most fundamental things that our freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, our civil liberties, our right to privacy, and, protection against warrantless surveillance by our government. You can go down this whole list of these things that should be, they are the foundation of our country. But we're at a point now where they are wholly not only just being dismissed, they are being destroyed and taken away. in almost every way. And so, yeah, I got strong feelings about that. and so I convey that in the book, but I'm glad that people are as you said, recognizing that I'm not just reciting someone else's talking points. I share my own experiences and my own understandings and realizations, and end with that call to action, where even though it can feel hopeless and dark, and understanding, big power, big politicians, big tech, big media, big, George Soros billionaires, they have a lot of power, and they're exercising every lever of their power to try to take away our freedom right now. But all hope is not lost because of who we are in this country, and the vision our founders had, where we are the most powerful, which is why they're trying to take our freedom away, because we are the most dangerous threat to their power, but we are only powerful if we choose to use that power. And that's where that individual responsibility comes in. We have to take action, every one of us.
Free the People is embarking on our most ambitious project to date to document and expose the lies behind the greatest public health failure in my lifetime. We're talking to insiders with firsthand knowledge of the government's role in funding, creating, and then covering up the COVID-19 virus in our exclusive new documentary series, The Cover-Up. But I need your help. We won't get to the bottom of this scandal alone, so I'm asking viewers to crowdsource any information that could be helpful to our investigation. If you're watching this, you already know what the government did during lockdowns was unforgivable. Help us get to the truth and prevent it from ever happening again. To get involved, go to freethepeople.org/coverup. That's freethepeople.org/coverup. The truth is out there. It strikes me that you sort of lived through sort of a somewhat mysterious transformation of the Democratic Party. I'm old enough to remember when Bernie Sanders was catching fire, primarily, but not exclusively, because of his principled anti-war stance,
Sure.
criticizing forever wars. I still remember a hearing where that was brought together by Rand Paul, and Bernie gave this principled argument against endless wars, and I'm like, I may be a Bernie bro now. Now, I think he's changed,
Yeah.
but I also think that you lived through this Democratic Party transformation that happened quite quickly from when he was running to when you were running. And I rewatched your glorious takedown of Kamala Harris from what year was that?
That was 2020.
2020.
I think that was either early 2020 or towards the end of 2019.
And I have a theory, but retell the story about what happened. Like, that was your moment, and then suddenly Google started playing games. Is it the same debate?
It was not the same debate.
Okay.
The very first debate, which was held in Miami, the first Democratic presidential primary debate, I don't remember what month it was, but it was around May, June, maybe the middle of 2019. And, I mean, I didn't go in with rose-colored glasses about my own position in this field of, what was it, 22, I think, at its height of people.
More people were running than were registered to vote.
Almost. And so, they pulled names out of a hat. They had two debates, one on one night, then there would be one the next night, 10 people on each stage. And so my name got pulled for the first night. This was the opportunity that I would have to introduce myself to the American people and to try to get across my reason for offering to serve as president and commander-in-chief. And I intended to make the most of it. The hope was that people would see me and hear what I had to say, and then go and say, gosh, I want to know more about her. That's what everybody would hope for. But especially someone like me, who most people in the country had no idea who I was. They never heard my name before. And I certainly had the least amount of money from a campaign standpoint to be able to introduce myself to the entire country. And so this was that opportunity. And you only get to make a first impression once. And so I had my tech team. We were ready so that when hopefully people would put my name into their search engine, that my website would pop up instead of whatever trash Google wanted to push to the top of page one. And so thankfully, after that first debate, I think I had 6.5 minutes or 7 minutes of total talking time, but I was the most searched candidate of the night. It's like, awesome. That's what I hoped for. But then I heard from my team that Google had suspended our ad account that allowed me to put my website there at the top of page one when people searched, with no explanation at all. It was, our account was suspended for an undetermined period of time, and it consumed that peak period of interest that came after that first debate. And then they weren't answering calls, emails. We couldn't get through to a live person at all. And then magically it was restored one day. And so, you know, I mean, that was a big problem.
After the peak had left.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so, you know, ultimately I ended up filing a lawsuit against Google for election interference. I wasn't under the illusion that we had any good shot at winning this, going up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But I did it to prove the point and to make the point that if this big tech monopoly can do this and interfere in a presidential election campaign of a sitting member of Congress, just imagine how else they are interfering in our election. And of course, since then, we have seen evidence of many, many ways in which they are doing this and favoring their friends in the Democratic Party leadership. And that's when people ask me, like, who are the Democrat elite? And I make a distinction in my book in referencing the Democrat elite versus Democrats, because I know a lot of Democrats, people who are still Democrats, who hate what the Democratic Party has become. And so the Democrat elite is not only the Nancy Pelosi's and Chuck Schumer's of the world and the Barack Obamas and the Hillary Clintons or the George Soroses. It is their friends in big tech. It is their friends in the mainstream propaganda media. It is their friends in these groups that are this cabal. And it is a cabal of warmongers. And it is a cabal of people who ultimately their end state is total control and power, and to take away and undermine our liberties so that we only see what they want us to see. We're only allowed to say what they allow us to say. And they will have access to every part of our lives.
I've been obsessed with everything about lockdowns and the origins of COVID, and particularly fascinated by the extreme and ultimately ham-fisted way that the national security apparatus built this censorship machine. And the reason I asked the question about what Google did to you is I think there's a common theme here. I think that the people that, I don't know if big tech controls the censorship industrial complex in government or vice versa, or if it's just like, I think it's a happy marriage between the two interest groups. But it may not have been a random guy at Google that said, we're going to stifle Tulsi Gabbard. It may have been a general incentive-based system that said, if you're anti-war, you're hurting our bottom line, because so much of how we finance our platforms is through the war machine. Yeah. The advertising, like government advertising, is, I think, second only to maybe big pharma right now. So they're captured. It's an ecosystem. Yes. And I think that left, right, center, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, whatever it is, voices that question never-ending war are the ultimate target to stifle.
Yes, it's true. And it's not my opinion or your opinion. It's been proven as fact over and over and over again with people from different political parties or different political backgrounds or views. One of the things that was interesting to me in the judge's ruling in striking down the lawsuit against me, of course, was he basically said that there's no basis for this lawsuit because Google is not in the business of administering elections. They are not the ones who are going in and counting ballots or going in and casting votes. And I just thought, man, If only he actually knew what was going on, and how very directly this massive private corporation monopoly was very directly interfering in our elections, and for specific interests and specific reasons. And you pointed it out exactly. We saw it with the, blocking and censoring, quote unquote, misinformation, disinformation during COVID, and things that were common sense, like, hey, most Americans are vitamin D deficient. Like, take some vitamin D, be a good idea. Like, that wasn't even allowed. It was really
it's too radical.
Radical. But that's the thing that is both insane, but also where I hope that the best thing that could come from all of this is that more and more people who hate politics, who never watch the news, who previously were not paying attention, maybe have never voted before, are now having their eyes opened into, well, this is what happens when you allow people to get in power or stay in power who are power hungry and are willing to sacrifice our fundamental freedoms in order to strengthen their stranglehold on power.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool. There's a basic public choice story here about how government can fail even at those most essential functions that everyone seems to agree: national defense and protecting life and property. But when you concentrate power there, you still get all these perverse incentives, and you get power-hungry people that rise to the top. Right. So it's a bit of a conundrum, because as a libertarian, I would look at almost every government failure and say there's a story there about some cabal of interests, corporate interests, government interests, bureaucratic interests that inevitably corrupt whatever it is you're trying to do. So how do you limit that? Because it's built into the system. The things that you need the government to do, the essential functions that you outline in your book, you still have all of this weirdness that seems unfixable. Yeah,
it is. It won't be easy, but it is fixable. And again, it starts with us taking our responsibility to be informed citizens and exercising our vote and using our voice to hold these people to account. Yes, there are a number of different things that could be done about, I've long been a proponent of prohibiting corporate PAC contributions to politicians. I experienced it myself. I was taking contributions from different corporate interests during my first couple of years in Congress, and it was just like it was not good. It was not right. and it was just the reality of, okay, and this is what the party told us, both freshman Democrats, freshman Republicans coming in, is like, hey, look, you're going to spend a good 6 to 8 hours out of every single day raising money from lobbyists. That's just the norm in Washington. And so you see, for me, as somebody who ran in a Democratic primary, I have not had Democratic Party support in any race that I've run at any level of government. And it was, my campaigns were about going directly to the people and making my case. And so to then transition into being elected to Congress, and that being one of the first briefings that we got from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, I was like, well, what about the work? Well, like, you're on at least a couple of committees. You've got votes on the floor almost every day of the week. What are we voting on? And constituent services and taking care of people back home. And like, there's a lot of actual work. But that was a stark picture of the norm, where the vast majority of your time will be spent with these different corporate interests, and the minority amount of your time will be spent on going and actually doing committee work and casting your votes. But it's reflected in how Washington is so dysfunctional and is not actually fulfilling its foremost and most basic obligations. And anyway, so I mean, I saw my entire schedule change for me, and I was like, nope, I'm not going to take any more of this money. And I had so much time. I had so much time on my hands, and that to me is a huge change that would fix a lot of this. It's not the only change, but that would help refocus our political leaders' priorities to where they need to be, and to a point where we don't have to question, like, okay, so you voted this way on that bill that favors big pharma because, oh, let me look, big pharma is one of your biggest industry donors. It's a horrible thing for, which it is the reality. I mean, Americans assume that politicians are corrupt and that they're going to look out for their own interest and not the interest of the people. I have hope, because if we do our jobs, we can fix this.
It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, because I think, and I worked on the Hill centuries ago, like I think Abe Lincoln was the president or something. And the only people that would come into your office were people that wanted something, and typically, lobbyists and interests and stuff. Very few citizens came in and just said, would you just leave us alone and maybe balance the budget? It's just not like Washington doesn't attract that.
Yeah.
So it strikes me, as long as, and today, to bring it full circle, like so much of the money being made off of government favors is either military contractors or big pharma.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to realize that they're not so different anymore. So the question is, as long as we're doing forever war, as long as we're mandating that everybody consume pharmaceutical companies' products, I don't think you can choke that money off. So I think you have to start with, maybe we shouldn't be doing all these things. Maybe we need to defund the never-ending wars. And then maybe it's possible for a citizen legislator to run just with support from her constituents.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, as you're walking through this, which politician that's in the pocket of this industry is going to vote to defund the industry?
Right.
So it is, ultimately, we've seen, there are candidates out there who are running for Congress now in our country who have committed to, hey, I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. So from a voter's standpoint, like, that's something that you can, as you're looking at your options of which candidates are running for a race, support the candidate that has said, no, I'm not going to take any of their money. I don't care what the industry is. I'm not going to take any corporate PAC money. And that's a good way to start bringing about that change. And it's also helpful if you're like, okay, cool, I can write a $20 check to help support this candidate, so that there is true grassroots support coming from the people, and that they will never forget who they are there to serve.
In some ways, and this is, I think, why the government has so gone after speech online, because I'm of this era. I'll go all the way back to Howard Dean, and Ron Paul and the Tea Party, and then Bernie Sanders, and then Donald Trump in a different way, because he was a bit of a media star even before social media. And there is a common thread in there. Questioning the military-industrial complex. Yeah. And I didn't realize that at the time, to be honest with you. Like, I'm a former Tea Party guy, and I realized that the thing that ultimately killed the Tea Party was the unwillingness of many Republicans to put limits on defense spending. Because we had these caps that were imposed, the Tea Party's demanding a balanced budget and all that stuff. And the compromise is we'll cap domestic spending, modest caps, right? That was always the
leverage point.
Modest caps. And it was Republicans that undid that.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't stomach any limits on a blank check on the war on terror.
Yeah.
And so all of that was sort of grassroots democratic uprising against the machine. And one after another, it sort of gets swatted out.
Yeah. I
think that's the fight.
Yeah. It's interesting as you look throughout this recent history, and I talk about this in my book as well, about on the Democrat side, at least, how much it has shifted, where even when I first came into Congress, I mean, Dennis Kucinich was there. He was one of the first members of Congress to endorse me when I ran for Congress. And there were a few others, not a lot, but there were a few other really stalwart voices for peace and increase, and for civil liberties, and some of the basic things that we should expect of our members of Congress. But those voices have been increasingly diminished, even as some of the same people are there. And that's what's been really disheartening for me to see, is that people who even for decades have been very strong voices calling out the threats and dangers of this increasingly cozy relationship between members of Congress and the military-industrial complex, and the real cost that has on our everyday lives all across this country, have become not only quiet, they're almost universally non-existent at this point in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And again, that's one of the main reasons why I left. The party was very different 20 years ago when I joined it. And to see that expectation and that mandate of total conformity, total compliance, the raucous Big Tent Democratic Party of the past is gone. And for whatever reason, people are afraid. Even people, again, longtime members of Congress, people are afraid to take the positions that I hope still exist in their heart, but for some reason don't feel that they have the platform to be able to voice anymore.
It would have, like, if I had told you 20 years ago that the strongest voices for peace would be in the Republican Party,
exactly,
you would have thought I was crazy.
I think a lot of people would have thought you were crazy. Yeah. You yourself included.
I would have said it first. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where, obviously there are problems with our whole political system, but I do give credit to the Republican Party of today that there are so many different people with different views, that there appears to be far more dialogue and debate on the floor of the House of Representatives and in communities across the country, that even as people are, some people may be frustrated and, oh, this is messy and so disorganized. I've had some Republicans come up to me and say, hey, what's Nancy Pelosi's secret? Like, how does the Democratic Party force everyone to fall in line? I was like, first of all, it's not a good thing. You shouldn't want to know, you shouldn't want to know that tactic. But that ultimately what the end result is, we are in a better place as a country for that.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty, and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. Yeah, it really is kind of us versus them, and I can be really sad about everything that's happened for the last 5 years, but I can also see this trend.
And what's the us versus them you're referring to?
The DC machine.
Yes, I agree. Versus the people.
Versus the people.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of reasons why we could be pessimistic about that. Like the last 4 years have just been devastating for my sense of hope for this country, but I still see this bubbling up.
Yeah.
And when I see this insane infrastructure of them trying to censor Joe on Twitter because he told a joke
yes.
about the war.
Yes.
I'm like, that's pretty desperate.
Yeah.
Like, they must be afraid that we actually have tools to figure this stuff out. And it's like whack-a-mole, where somebody rises up and then Google pulls your AdWords. Yes. And like, we got her. But then they keep coming. So yeah. I think
I agree, though. I think that's an important point just to underline here, is that even with all of the frustration that goes with this increased censorship and increased, big brother, big government overreach, is we know that it is coming from a place of fear. And that should be an empowering feeling.
Yeah.
That reminds us, yeah, they're afraid of us. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do with that power? Not what they want us to. Don't stay home. Don't sit back. Don't put your head in the sand.
I really wished that more Americans had risen up against this insane lockdown stuff. And, you know, we've hopefully for the last time trusted government experts that we thought that science was unimpeachable versus government science, which is completely corrupted.
Yes.
And we thought that the healthcare profession wasn't captured. We now know that it's captured, but I think that there's...
But also that, sorry to interrupt,
No, go
but
ahead.
that connection between the two. And I know you've spoken with doctors. I've spoken with doctors in California specifically who were told, we will take your medical license away from you if you challenge the government's position on this. So when you have a doctor who knows that what's happening is not right, and it's not based in science, and it's not based on what we should do, the government's position in this country, and then they have their livelihood and their ability to practice medicine being threatened, that's a tough decision for people to make when they got kids in college and families, and they're trying to support employees who would be out of a job if they had their license taken away. And it goes back to that very, very dangerous place of this incredible, and in my lifetime at least, unprecedented abuse of power.
Centralized power. I've had
power.
many of those doctors on my show, and some of the heroes like Jay Bhattacharya,
Yes.
who they went after his wife, they went after his career, he got death threats, they tried to destroy him. And of course, in that situation, you have to double down. You have to speak louder.
Yes.
Otherwise, they will destroy you. If you bend the knee at that point, you're done.
Completely.
But it sort of gets to this same dilemma. If we're centralizing healthcare decisions, and nothing could be more centralized than mandating that everybody gets a shot.
Yes.
If we're doing that, and then if you refuse to do that because you have control over your own body and you have the freedom to choose, they tell you, okay, well, you're not going to get that heart surgery. This should be a wake-up call. Like controlling your healthcare is controlling you. They own you at that point.
Yes.
And again, like I wish more people would have spoken up early, but I think there is an awakening here because we sort of discovered that some of these institutions, like your doctor, they're stuck, or they're captured, or
they're being
something.
Threatened.
Right.
Yeah,
they're being
exactly.
threatened.
Exactly. I think I agree. I think that there was, there was a period there at the beginning of this whole COVID crisis where I believe that most Americans are good-hearted, compassionate, caring people. And that when asked to do something for the greater good, there is an openness and a willingness. Of course, I want to help take care of someone else, and I don't want to put someone else at risk unnecessarily. And the problem here is that good-heartedness and compassion that exists in most people in this country was completely exploited and manipulated to feed this unprecedented power grab, which as that went on, I think it became more and more clear to a lot of people that was exactly what was happening, because it just didn't even make sense. It didn't make sense. And the science wasn't there to back up what they were selling it. And then there was this exception, and you can't do this, but these people will be allowed to do that because of whatever. I mean, they were making it up as they went along, very clearly.
So I'm doing this investigative series with Rand Paul, Jay Bhattacharya, and others, and it's becoming more and more clear to me that the response to COVID was not a healthcare response. It was almost a military response. And you're starting to see the breadcrumbs that lead back to this mad science experiment, ostensibly in our best interest to stop bioterrorism. But the collateral damage of all that is insane, because once they made this mistake, which should have been obvious, something's going to leak. You're doing this mad science experiment in a crappy lab in China. then they covered it up.
Yeah.
And people died because of the cover-up. Obviously, people died because of what I believe is a lab leak, but they died of the cover-up, and that's inexcusable. Like that can't happen again.
I agree. And there has to be, in an ideal world, I'm not naive enough to think that this is going to happen, but we should expect and demand accountability for that, because if no one is held to account, then it will continue to happen. You mentioned, when we're talking about this gain of function research and how dangerous it is, and how finally we are seeing now, years later, that we have been lied to this whole time, and Rand Paul has been at the forefront of this demand for the truth. But I look back to that inherent danger and risk is something that our own government is creating. They are creating this risk. And it's not just overseas labs. It's labs here in the United States of America. And I worked with Rand on some legislation to try to force that transparency, which we still don't have to this day. But that was one of the reasons why, when the Ukraine war kicked off, I said, well, we should look for all of the labs, the bio labs that the Department of Defense and the U.S. government is funding in Ukraine, because who knows what exists in those labs, and they are vulnerable in a place under an active state of warfare. If they are compromised, we may see the next big thing that puts us and the world at great risk. And this was something, Victoria Nuland talked about in the committee, and yes, we're concerned about this. And when I said it, was it Mitt Romney called me a treasonous liar, and others said, well, she's a Russian stooge and all this stuff. And I only share that because it speaks to that cover up, and it speaks to that lack of transparency, and how people who are captured by and beholden to the military industrial complex, and it's not the medical complex, it's not even healthcare, because it's not actual care for our health, but the big pharma complex, they're not willing to even have that debate in the conversation, because whether they admit it or not, deep down inside, they know that they're wrong.
And to your point, the Democratic Party in particular it feels like almost 100% captured by that whole thing.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where the line between pharma and government is anymore, because so much of that intellectual property is in fact government-owned property, and vice versa. And it's a mess. And
it extends to the FDA, it extends to the NIH, it extends to all of these different agencies, government agencies that have a part in this, and how little we actually know about the revolving door, and who's getting paid off by who, and the FDA rulings about this drug or that drug, and then they go and work for that company. It's you're right. Where is the line?
Is it political capture? Is there a line? Like, is it political capture where the government's browbeating corporations, or is it regulatory capture where the corporations are gaming the system to get rich? It's all of the above.
In my assessment, it is the big pharma industry that has far more weight and influence over government. They are gaming the system to their own benefit, their own monetary benefit. They provide far, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but the last time I looked, they provide far more in contributions to members of Congress than they spend on marketing their drugs and the ads that we see in TV and online, which is an exorbitant amount of money. They are so deeply entrenched within these so-called regulatory agencies, and they're playing the long game on this, knowing that if we've got our people in there, they're going to rule in our favor. And if we find the one person who doesn't, then they'll figure out a way to get rid of that person.
So we got to wrap up. I know you have a heart out to do another interview, but I want to end with this observation / question, because I have said again and again, particularly in the context of everything I've been bitching about during this hour, is some of the most interesting people to me are people that come from the left, former self-identified progressives who were sort of red-pilled during lockdowns, during the censorship, during the stifling of anti-war voices, and you very much fit into that category. But the question I have, and I used to say this going all the way back to 2016, that I would see the similarities between Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul. And your background is you were a Bernie Sanders supporter in 16.
Really primarily around foreign policy.
Yeah. And as I said, I'm a closet Bernie bro.
Yeah.
The old Bernie who was more consistent on foreign policy.
Yeah.
But at a superficial level, raging against mass incarceration, raging against endless war, questioning crony capitalism, being free speech warriors. The list goes on. And at a very superficial level, not that superficial, Ron Paul and Bernie were saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, you'd be shocked to know that I tend to agree with Ron Paul's solutions quite a bit more. But I think, again, like these are both politicians who were celebrated for their authenticity. They really turned young people on to these ideas. That's an opportunity.
Yes.
The authenticity of that and the willingness to speak truth to power, but also finding those Aloha-based cooperative solutions.
Yes. Yeah, it's. I was smiling because I was in New Hampshire on Sunday, and was there. We did a meet and greet and a book signing, and there were two young men. They were probably 17 or 18. I think they were just about to graduate from high school, and they both had huge Ron Paul shirts on. And they came up there like, Ron Paul's the man. I was like, yeah, Ron Paul is the man. And we talked about whether or not they were going to go to the convention. They're like, oh, we're thinking about it. And I was like, you should definitely go. I think this one's going to be a big one. But it was just heartening to see these young men entering out into the world of adulthood, already knowing some of the most important things to set them up as they go out. And it's I think what it all comes down to, and you alluded to this earlier when you said it's us versus them, it is the elite or the permanent Washington establishment or the deep state. There's a lot of different names that describe this group versus the people. And to me, that is really what is at the heart of this election that we're facing this year in November. But it's also... it's really where, for the both short and long term, where I think we should find hope, is that when we stand together, when we the people stand together, we can actually fix this very, very, very broken, deeply corrupt system. But it does require courage. It requires courage at a minimum to speak the truth, even as you're being attacked, as you said with Jay and others, to stand stronger in speaking the truth. And doing so in a way that is rooted in that aloha, because so often, and I've had, and I'm sure you have as well over all of the years, interactions with people who are just like, you know what, I'm right, you're wrong, I don't even want to see your face. Like, that's not helpful. That's not constructive.
I live in Washington. That happens to me every day.
Exactly. But recognizing that through dialogue and conversation, through helping share our own experiences with others who may not have seen or experienced what we have seen, we can get to a place where we recognize at a fundamental level, whatever our agreements or disagreements may be around, immigration reform or border security or education or these different things, none of that's going to matter if we don't have the freedom to speak and to express ourselves and to have that right to make those individual choices for ourselves. And so being able to recognize, yes, it is us versus them. We have to come together around our fundamental constitutional rights, freedoms, and liberties, and get our country back on track. And say this is the time we have to save our country.
Small white pill to wrap up.
Yes.
Your book, For Love of Country, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for the last 3 weeks.
Yes.
I don't even know how that's possible.
I
must be
was
selling
shocked.
so many copies.
I was shocked.
Because they don't allow
there.
books like yours on that list.
No, they don't.
So
Not
something's
normally.
happening. You're breaking through.
I hope.
Where do we get your book? Anywhere?
You can get it. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get a signed copy at tulsigabbard.com. And I'm grateful that you had me here today. And thank you for taking the time to read the book and the feedback that you shared. And really thank you for being a stalwart voice for liberty.
Thank you for doing this. I've enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.